Welcome to our 8th annual Writers Symposium by the Sea. I'm Dean Nelson on the journalism faculty here at Point Loma. We have the distinct privilege of having Chris Willman, one of the entertainment writers for Entertainment Weekly magazine. I first heard about Chris from some friends of mine who are also writers and who respect good writing. When I started getting emails from them saying, you got to see this story on, and it could have been about George Harrison, it could have been about any number of different people, and the thing they all had in common was that they were extremely well written, thoughtful, reflective, went beyond just the glitz and the pizzazz. The other thing they had in common was that they were all written by Chris Willman. So, several months ago I got in contact with him and asked him if he would be a part of our symposium. He graciously accepted, and I think he's got a lot to talk to us about, a lot to share with us. So would you give a Writers Symposium welcome to Chris Willman?
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, part of such an esteemed roster of writers and reporters. I feel like I'm here to provide the low culture portion of the program, so I'll try to live up to that or down to that, as the case may be. And I hope you excuse me if occasionally I hold these papers up in front of my eyes, because I have an explanation for this minuscule writing you see, which is that probably on 80% of the assignments I go out on, I forget to take a notepad. So I've become used to writing notes on the backs of receipts and things like that, and my writing has evolved to a very sort of microscopic level, so occasionally I may have to put this in front of my face. I was talking with Dean Nelson about possible topics for this, and one of the questions he suggested was, is there any limit to our obsession with celebrity culture and pop culture? To which the obvious answer from my point of view, for the sake of my job, would be, I hope not. But I do feel certainly ambivalent about that. And if you read the magazine, Entertainment Weekly, I think even within the magazine you'll sense a certain ambivalence about pop culture and how proper it is to be obsessed with it. And certainly we wallow in it, as much as it's possible to wallow in it, with a bit of a guilty feeling about that at the same time, I think maybe as an undertone in the writing. And you know, you can call that having it both ways, having your cake and eat it too. There's a little bit of an attitude of we're above all this even though we wallow in it. And maybe that's a little bit unseemly, but I think it beats the alternative, which is to look at all this without any sense of irony and to take it all at face value. I would say that, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the magazine. EW is a fairly lighthearted magazine. But you know, we are capable of moments of gravity, so maybe we're a little bit better equipped than some to go the serious route when the conditions dictate it. Sometimes I feel like I'm defending the magazine because we get ripped apart a lot by people I know. I find myself defending it to my friends sometimes. I think that some of the criticism, some of the film criticism, such as fairly serious, and the news stories address serious issues now and again, not necessarily as a matter of course, so it doesn't seem completely out of character when for an issue or two or a section or two we have a little bit of gravity. But as a magazine, you know, our stamp is certainly irreverence. There's a word that used to be used in connection with a magazine quite a bit, the word snarky. I'm not even sure what the dictionary definition of snarky is, but you probably know it when you see it. It's kind of a knowing tone, a little bit of sarcasm. There's an attitude of, yes, we wallow in this, but really we're kind of above it all. And again, that's you know, having your cake and eating it too a little bit. But I think you know, if something does happen, God forbid, along those lines, it's a little bit harder for someone like an Us Weekly to react to it, although I think we can kind of predict what the response would be. I mean, they're famous for their section, The Stars Are Just Like Us, where they have paparazzi shots of, you know, stars walking their dogs or whatever. So I guess it'll be, you know, Brad and Jennifer are just like us. They're staying in, you know, trying to get shots through the curtains in the window, or getting a shot of Brad taking his dog out for a dump in front of the brownstone. So we'll see what happens. And maybe during the question and answer period, would be curious to hear from some of you younger folk how you think your contemporaries responded during that time, right after 9/11, because certainly there was a perception that the gatekeepers were more affected than perhaps, just kind of young people across the country. I don't know whether that's true or not. We were reading stories in the news about 18-year-olds who didn't know what the big deal was and were kind of upset that movie theaters were closed for a couple days. And I don't know if that's a stereotype or true, so I'd be interested to hear from some of you about yourselves and your friends and whether you think your generation had a deeply felt response or didn't take it that hard. I guess that raises a question that sort of lead me in some lighter areas of my talk, which is, am I more likely to gravitate toward Us Weekly or Atlantic Monthly? I'll leave EW out of it for now. And how many of us do buy both? And, is comfort food appropriate? Do we need to think of that as a guilty pleasure? I think it's a good tension to have in our lives because, I'm a little bit older than a lot of you, but Generation X in particular, some of you would be Generation Y. I don't know where we break down those divisions. Certainly is more immersed in pop culture even than I was growing up. I think I was part of the last generation that grew up without cable. That may be a point of demarcation because we get interns at the magazine now. I'm 41, and so we have interns who were probably about 20 years younger than me, and they know more about the television of the 60s than I certainly do. And I think that's the result of Nick at Night and TV Land and all that stuff, and it's just unfathomable to me that they know more about the TV I grew up on than I do. And it's I think the challenges that come from that are something that even my generation didn't have to face quite so much as to how do you put all this in perspective. And even though technically I'm a late-in baby boomer, certainly I identify with Generation X in that I think our magazine is very kind of stereotypically Generation X in being, I'll use this term I heard on the radio the other day, relentlessly illusory. I was listening to NPR the other day, and they had a book review on of this book called, a new novel called Gilligan's Wake, which is written, I guess, in the style of Finnegan's Wake, but populated with sitcom characters, as well as real characters from throughout the 20th century, so that you have, I guess, an aged Daisy from The Great Gatsby interacting with, the skipper, and as well as some real-life figures. And the reviewer on NPR was giving it a great review, but it just sounded exhausting to me to go from reference to reference to reference, and even though it sounded very well written. Finally, she said, this may not be for you if you're not into the relentlessly illusory. And I thought, that's a little bit too relentless for me. But certainly our magazine is relentlessly illusory. We go for sort of an audience that at least imagines itself to be insiders about entertainment. And sometimes I've been proud, perhaps too proud, of the amount of references and allusions I get to sneak in. Sort of the further back you get in the magazine, the more you can sneak in. And if you're doing a news story, there's kind of a mandate to make it understandable to everyone. But by the time you get back to the capsule music reviews, the editors have stopped caring, and you can just kind of throw in there anything you want to. And sometimes it's fun to make a reference to some obscure 60s band or something that, you know, about 15 people will get and find out that it actually gets into the magazine. But at the same time, I feel not entirely comfortable with that, because I think that, you know, certainly in the realm of criticism, if you can produce an honest emotional response that's direct and to the point, that beats these kind of endless references and allusions. I'll talk about my background a little bit. I grew up obsessed with movies and music, as you might guess. I also grew up in a very conservative religious home, so there was definitely a tension there, and kind of for a while growing up, every pleasure was a guilty pleasure. So, you know, magazines made a franchise out of guilty pleasures. We used to have an annual feature in Entertainment Weekly called Guilty Pleasures, and then we stopped it, and I think it's finally because that's what the whole magazine is about for the most part, it's guilty pleasures, so it seemed a little unfair to single a few things out. So I think that ambivalent attitude I had, you know, suited me well for going to work for Entertainment Weekly, where, like I said, we have that attitude of, yes, we're indulging in all this, but we know better. I think in biblical terms, there's the phrase, in the world but not of the world, and Entertainment Weekly has that attitude a little bit of, you know, we're in the entertainment business, but we're not of it. We can separate ourselves from it when we need to, and look at the bigger picture and see what it's all about. That whole sort of distancing irony that we have, again, bothers me sometimes. It can be cynical, it can be juvenile, to kind of set yourself apart from that. And then I can tell you that we got a few letters in the weeks after 9/11 when we did try to take a more serious attitude about certain things and suggest that a lot of the things in the culture were unworthy of us, unworthy of being produced and written about. And then we got some letters saying, look, this is what we look to you guys to write about. You know, you're at odds with yourself, odds with yourselves if you are going to tell us that, you know, we shouldn't be watching and listening to the stuff that we subscribe to the magazine to be told about. I think that was a fair response in some ways, but it's difficult for the magazine to get over its sense of irony. We had a new editor come in recently, a guy named Rick Tetzelli, came over from Fortune magazine. He's been making changes slowly but surely. One of the changes he wanted made was for not every headline to be a pun. And we didn't know how to react to that, because literally every headline in the magazine is a pun. We don't know how to do it any differently. I mean, literally don't know how to write a headline that isn't a pun. And so that mandate hasn't been implemented very successfully yet, just because we haven't figured out how to do it. Haven't figured out how to give those up. It's an interesting quandary. And I'm not a fan of the attitude where everything is a joking matter, which may be a little hypocritical of me to say, since I think, you know, in as much as I have any kind of voice at all as a writer, I'm probably known as somebody who goes for the joke when possible. And I wrote for the LA Times from '84 to '95, and I think my voice stood out a lot more there than it does at EW, because at the LA Times, nobody was trying to be funny. Arguably, no one knew how, at least at that time. I mean, Howard Rosenberg certainly has a sense of humor, and I think more so now than it used to be. You'll see writers who are able to bring a little bit of style in a humorous way to what they do. But at the time, back in the 80s, I just felt like I was the only guy doing that, and I kind of made a career out of that, of going for the joke. And part of it had to do with some of the assignments I took on. Basically, I would do anything. I would review any TV show, review any film, and a lot of times I got sent down to review the films that were opening without benefit of press screenings, which meant going down to Hollywood Boulevard on opening day to the matinee to see some exploitation film at some theater that's probably now long closed, and sit there with a bunch of bag ladies and be like the only sober person watching this terrible movie, and then reporting back on it. And I thought, you know, no one who's reading this in the Times is going to go see this movie. If I have to write about something so unentertaining, I might as well try to be entertaining while I'm doing it. And that worked for me as a writer, worked for my career. Now I'm trying to unlearn that. I'm trying to learn how not to go for the easy joke all the time. And it's difficult. And especially, I think one of the reasons I'm trying to unlearn that is that when I went to EW in '95, suddenly everyone wrote like I wrote. Everyone had the same sense of humor, the same sense of irony, the same instinct to, you know, finish things off with one last punchline before you go out. And you know, the challenge as a writer is always not to go with the flow. And it's easy to get stuck in a rut when you're at a magazine or a newspaper where there's a certain style. And if your natural inclination is to go with that a little bit anyway, then you really have to fight against it. So I'm constantly fighting to come up with an honest emotional response and not just make a joke out of everything. And for other, you know, the struggle will be different for some of you. You know, the struggle may be to introduce a little bit more levity into your writing. But it's certainly good to step back and reassess now and again. You know, magazine writing theoretically is a little bit less formulaic than newspaper writing. I say theoretically because we get stuck in our own kind of invisible formulas. And, you know, I talked a minute ago about ending with a punchline all the time. And there is kind of a cynical formula along those lines. When I used to write for the Times, where it was a little bit more straightforward, and I was writing a celebrity profile, I would usually try to end with a quote from the person and let them have the last word. But EW, kind of the unspoken formula is to add your own little stinger or kicker to the end. And I call that, just for my own purposes, the "yeah, that'll happen" tag. It's where you have, you know, one last quote from the person, and then you kind of add your own little aside that sort of says, winks at the audience, says, "Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen." And you know, that comes out of, I think, a valuable skepticism that we as a magazine have about the entertainment industry. And skepticism is a virtue, journalistically and otherwise. There is a mandate of the magazine to challenge the spin that comes in, because you know, a lot of publications just don't. I mean, I could cite you thing after thing where, you know, if you look at box office figures, you're probably used to seeing it and develop some of that skepticism yourself just naturally when you see a quote from a studio executive who's trumpeting the fact that their new movie had the best non-holiday February non-sequel opening ever, and the newspapers reprint that without noting that, you know, it doesn't take much to open well in February comparatively because it's a terrible month, and the fact that, you know, maybe the movie cost $120 million, you know, their record-breaking, you know, $18 million opening weekend still means the movie is a bomb. So there's certainly a skepticism that is healthy in dealing with things like that. On the music side, we deal with it all the time. There are a couple of labels in particular that are known for finding ways to waffle on figures. I mean, I just got an invitation recently to a party. It was in New York, so I couldn't go, but it was a party that J Records was holding in New York for Alicia Keys to celebrate her 10 times platinum success. I thought, gosh, I would swear that album isn't more than 5 times platinum, so I looked it up and that was the case, and I shot a note off to the publicist saying, you know, did this somehow leap from 5 to 10 million in sales, and this hasn't been certified yet? I don't think that's the case, but, and I knew exactly what he was going to write back, which is that, oh, that's worldwide sales. And we get a lot of that because US sales can be certified. Worldwide, you can just make up any number, and there's no way to verify it. And technically they're not supposed to use the word platinum because that only refers to what's going on in America, but you know, the line of fudging gets a little bit more each time someone reports that without questioning it. Entertainment Weekly, you know, we were talking about celebrity culture earlier, and Entertainment Weekly, those of you who are familiar with the magazine may know that technically we don't do celebrity gossip. You know, I think we thought that Us Weekly, when they went weekly, but Us Weekly was a monthly, they were treading a lot of the same territory as EW. So when they took it to a weekly, we thought they were going to be competition, and they've done very well for themselves, but they've really ignored our territory and gone exclusively for being sort of the upscale tabloid sort of thing. And we have kind of a high and mighty attitude about the things we don't do at the magazine, that we don't do gossip stories. We don't cover people's personal lives. But of course there's a little room for negotiation in there too, because we do cover people's personal lives if it affects, quote unquote, the work or affects the business. And so, you know, we might not cover every specific of Mariah Carey's nervous breakdown, but if it affects her career prospects, then it's game for us to go after that. Basically, we do have a lot of gossip in the magazine, but it's gossip about business and the art. So, you know, we're not going to do a story on, you know, whether or not J-Lo and Ben Affleck are in trouble. But if they're in trouble and that affects their next movie's prospects, then we might go after it. I'll say that I've had arguments, maybe arguments is too strong a word, but discussions with editors when I felt pressured to sort of go for the negative angle. I think that when we do forecast issues of the magazine at the beginning of each year, you know, there's a pressure to position everything in terms of risk and danger and how, you know, this project is make or break, and someone's had a bad luck streak, and if this doesn't succeed, then they're over. And, you know, when it's kind of mindless movie stuff, it doesn't bother me, but, you know, occasionally that sort of attitude gets applied to people and projects that I care about, and afterward, things being described in terms of being disasters, when artistically they were very valid and a risk worth taking, but the focus of the magazine sometimes is on pitching everything in business terms, and success or failure is measured in numbers. That's something I fight against, often in vain, although I think we're easing up a little bit on that. But at the same time, I think there is a celebratory aspect to the magazine. And again, it's not always celebrating the stuff I like. But when I think about why I got into this business, it was to evangelize, basically. There was stuff out there I liked that I was afraid other people were going to miss, and I wanted to hit the stump for it. And now and again I get a chance to do that. I'm not always covering the stuff I want to cover, and I think probably anyone who's in this line of work feels frustrated that market concerns dictate what gets covered, or at least what gets significant real estate within the pages. But it's rewarding sometimes even just to write that 80-word capsule review of something that isn't going to get covered in any other magazine. And I'm going to go into my background a little bit just to show you where I'm coming from. As a kid, I grew up in Boise, Idaho. Later on, lived in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was a fearfully, painfully shy kid. You may have guessed that by now. I've gotten a little better since then, but basically one of my earliest memories is of being in a restaurant in Boise, Idaho, and there was a local weatherman there who I sort of adored as a little kid. My family wanted to take me over to introduce me to him, and then I went and hid under the table, literally would not come out from under the table to meet this guy. So you may think it's curious that I went into the career I went into, where basically I meet hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are either famous and or that I admire, and forced to talk to them. And any good shrink would see that clearly I'm working something out there. But it's fun. I mean, I complain about what I do a lot, but it's been very rewarding in terms of the people I get to talk to. I've gone back and forth in my career with different emphases on being a critic or being more of a feature writer. For a while when I was at the LA Times, I was gravitating more towards being a critic. And since I've been at EW, I do a lot of reviewing, and I can speak to a lot of things about reviewing, but my emphasis kind of shifted back towards doing celebrity profiles, if you will. And I use the word celebrity loosely because a lot of times the people we cover, it would be, we try to catch people right before they become huge. And so I can look back, and someone like John Mayer is a celebrity now, but wasn't necessarily when we first covered him. But just in terms of the nuts and bolts of writing, I want to get into a few things about that. I went to J school, to Cal State Long Beach, and then USC, and really learned the drill, learned the inverted pyramid and everything goes with that. I think I saw myself being a Woodward and Bernstein type of guy more than Robin Leach or something as a role model. So not quite sure how I drifted over into entertainment journalism so exclusively, but it was '84 when I started writing for the Times, the LA Times. I was still at USC then, and wanted to get an internship with the Times. By that time, I was already writing for a lot of community papers and small music magazines. Some of you may remember a now-defunct music magazine called BAM. I did a lot of cover stories for them, and I don't know how many of you know Robert Hilburn, longtime rock critic for the LA Times since '68, I think. We keep trying to calculate what that would make his age now, and I'm not sure I've got it down. But anyway, foolishly, I didn't go through the USC journalism department to try to get an internship. I thought I had sort of a do-it-yourself spirit, so I thought I'll just apply on my own. And of course, I never heard back because you go through official channels or else it doesn't work. So finally, I wrote to Robert Hilburn, sent him some of my clips. Of course, I knew who some of his favorite groups were, and I had done stories on a lot of those groups for BAM magazine or whatever. And so I knew I had a chance at getting his attention. And he wrote back to me and said, well, I don't know how to help you get an internship, but why don't you just come and freelance here? So I thought, oh, that's better. So I did that. Basically, I did what amounted to an unofficial internship, which is just that I went into the office and hung around every day, and thinking that eventually someone would kick me out, and never happened, fortunately. So I would do filing. I would do anything just for a chance to hang around and see how things went, as well as the writing I was doing, and that took off pretty quickly from doing a few occasional things to being full-time. And so, that any of you who are looking to get into that line of work, I would say avail yourself of every opportunity to ingratiate yourselves with the people who are already doing it. Don't necessarily always think about the official channels, because saw a lot of official interns come and go who were never heard from again, and who went into the office every day and were told what to do and didn't really learn the ropes of how things are actually done, because they got put to work on a lot of other kinds of busy work. And that's not to say don't be an intern, because being an intern is great. But so I started doing that in '84. In '88, started doing film reviews with Sheila Benson. A few of you may remember who was the film critic at the Times then, and she was sort of another mentor to me. And eventually I got to the point where I was doing a lot of really fun assignments. Some of the things I did, going on the set with Martin Scorsese, albeit not on a very good movie. It was Casino, but and I've done a lot of set visits, and I seem to be a curse, because every time I go on a set visit, it turns out to be a pretty awful movie. So I should stay well away, I guess. Interviewing people like Kirk Douglas and Sophia Loren. I mean, I love old Hollywood, so that was kind of those were dream assignments for me, even more than, interviewing Duran Duran or whoever else I was doing at the time. In '95, someone from EW called me, and I've been at EW since then, primarily on the music beat. And as far as interviewing people, I would say that a lot of times you'll hear this maxim which goes, don't meet your heroes. And I would say don't believe that, because a lot of times meeting your heroes is great. You find that sometimes there are good reasons why people become famous and renowned, and it's because they're charming and clever and thoughtful and creative, and we're getting a little bit away from the idea that you can have fame for the right reasons nowadays in the era of reality TV. But there are a few people that you're probably better off not meeting. You want to appreciate their art. Not all of them I've talked to. I think that anyone who does a Bob Dylan interview just comes away baffled and frustrated, and I haven't had to do that. But it's valuable to meet someone and get little insights into what makes them click, and it can add a new level of appreciation for their art. And I feel very fortunate in that regard. I mean, this is how I justify what I do, I guess. In that, I think about the days before everything was recorded, when music basically took place around the campfire or in pubs. And in those days, basically, for mass communication, all art was local. And it was just a matter of course that local citizens would get to hang out with artists. And now there's this art happens on a global level, and there's a wall of separation. So I guess I justify some of the perks I get of the job by just thinking that it's the way it used to be before the era of mass communication, and that I get to actually talk to these people who do this stuff. But maybe I'm just a star seeker. I'm not sure. But speaking of justification, talking about profiles a little bit, I think there is a place for celebrity journalism at its highest, and I'm not saying that I get to do this very often. I'd be hard-pressed to give you an example where I thought I successfully pulled this off, but I know I see other people do it, and that's celebrity journalism as human interest stories. Because, you know, you've probably heard it, it's an old cliche that everyone in life has an interesting story if you just pull it out of them. And there's no reason celebrity should be exempt from that. It's probably easier to get a good revealing interview out of your average Joe on the street than it is a name actor. Actors lie for a living, for one thing. And some of my best friends are actors, so not to disparage them, but they are strange people. That's about all I can say. I'm sure some of you are actors. But I highly recommend looking at the new issue of Los Angeles Magazine, if you can get it down here. I'm not sure if you can. It's kind of an interesting story, a cover story about celebrity profiles. And the writer actually parodies several writers who are well known for their celebrity profiles. A guy who writes for Vanity Fair, another guy who writes for Esquire, and he writes some pretty dead-on parodies that, you know, really make you think, what am I doing being in this profession? Because a lot of it does come down to getting an hour in a hotel room with someone and then creating this illusion that you had unlimited access and somehow saw into their soul. And fortunately, at the level of EW, you can negotiate a little bit more access than you can at some smaller publications, especially on the music side. Actors, a lot of times, it's just hard to get anything other than that hour at the Four Seasons. And it's very difficult to get a glimpse into someone's soul. Again, not to single out actors, but besides putting on a front for a living as a vocation, they're a lot more heavily practiced in terms of the publicity machinery than musicians are. So right now, my main beat is music, and I'm kind of grateful for that because even though in a way I think there are more interesting things going on in film right now than music, in independent film certainly, I just enjoy talking to musicians more. There's a little bit more of a direct connection between their souls and what makes it onto the disc. Writers and directors certainly are interesting people, but even then there are so many middlemen. Filmmaking is such a collaborative process that I think even the most high-minded filmmakers often feel like what ended up on the screen didn't really reflect completely what they wanted to get at. With musicians, they're just more of they're less middlemen to get in the way. Although I think that's changing now too. I think that as music sales sink like a stone, that label executives are getting more involved in the creative process and forcing decisions on people. So, I mean, what's happening with the music business is a whole another area that we may or may not get into. Just wanted to share, okay, first I just wanted to show you a diagram. Okay. Those of you who, unless things have changed from the old days, those of you who are in journalism probably familiar with the inverted pyramid. You have kind of the most general information at the top. As the story goes along, you get more and more into kind of narrow details. The idea being that if it goes out over the wire through AP or something, you know, a local editor who has a limited amount of space can just chop the bottom half of the story off and it won't really affect it because those are the least important details. I was trying to imagine how to diagram a celebrity profile, and it was something a little stranger looking. Looks a little bit like a cross, and I swear I didn't do this just because we're at a Nazarene college, but this is about what I came up with. It's because we pretend that we're breaking formulas in magazine writers, but really there's a formula that becomes a rut, and that's you have your anecdotal lead. You know, you have some little tale that you glimpsed during your hour with the person at the Four Seasons or whatever that you're going to use as the window into that person's soul, however trivial it may be. So that's this. And then all of a sudden, and then you have maybe 3, 4, 8, however many paragraphs into the piece, suddenly you explain, and that explains why this person is the biggest blah, 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 blah. And then you have what would be what we call the nut graph, where you really explain why you're writing this article, why we care about this person. And then suddenly we go back to the person's birth and early childhood and into the present, and then try to re-expand it toward the end, and then whether it's that one last meaningful quote from the person or the stinger that we add ourselves, again, we put a finish on it and try to remind people why this was meaningful in the first place, and for really being artsy about it, maybe even bookend it a little bit with some kind of reference back to the opening anecdote. And that can be a rut as much as anything, the whole sort of anecdotal lead. So for those of you who are looking to do this type of writing, I would say 4 times out of 5, the anecdotal lead may be the way to go, but it's going to get awfully tiresome if you do that every time. And I have my own pet peeve about celebrity profiles, which is, and once I tell you this, if you start looking, you'll notice it, how often the first word of each one of them is it's, IT''S. I can't tell you how many celebrity profiles begin with, it's raining in Seattle and Courtney Love steps out of her limo, or, you know, it's 99 degrees and so and so. And I find myself doing it all the time too. There's just something about starting off with the word it's something. And of course, that has to do with the fact that nowadays we tend to write these kind of future stories in the present tense, and there's a need to sort of immediately set a scene. And more often than not, it works, but I would just challenge you who do this kind of writing to sometimes break out of that format. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to get right to the point, and you think, oh, well, that's the inverted pyramid style of writing, to actually state your thesis in the opening paragraph. How jejune is that? But sometimes you want to surprise people or shock people instead of kind of like gently pulling them by the hand. You just want to slap them in the very first sentence. Don't want to do it every time, but I know when I was writing my Avril Lavigne story recently, I tried to do a long anecdotal lead about, you know, how she was playing with her hair and playing with her skateboards and this and that. And finally, the editor came back and said, you know, a lot of our readers aren't sure why they should care about Avril Lavigne, and we need to tell them in the first paragraph. So I thought, okay, I'll try to make that work. So it's a challenge not to do everything in the same format, even if you're not aware that you have a format. You probably do. And talk a little bit about criticism. I think ideally the critic and the feature writer are 2 different professions. It's interesting how it works out in, say, music journalism versus film journalism, at least at the upper levels. I mean, you know, Kenneth Turan at the LA Times does not do celebrity profiles. Robert Hilburn on the music side does. In music journalism, it's generally accepted that you'll be reviewing and interviewing people. And in film, at most dailies, you'll find that happening as well. Like at the LA Daily News, for example, I see Bob Strauss, who's their main film critic, and he'll give this devastating review to some film, and then right next to it is his kind of slavish profile of the leading actress. And it's a little bit schizoid to do that. And it becomes, I've had to recuse myself from doing reviews sometimes just because I'm too easily affected by my impressions of someone, and if I had a nice time with someone, I find it hard to come back and slam them. And I can think of times when I've been too nice as a critic. I had to review the last Faith Hill album, and I was probably nicer to it than I should have been in retrospect, and it's because, you know, I interviewed her once, did a profile of her, and had a nice time talking about our kids. I was about to have a baby, and we probably talked for about an hour about diapers and poo and things like that. And and then when you've had an experience like that with someone, it's hard to kind of distance yourself and then go back and think, well, yes, but she sucks, or whatever. And not that I think she does. I would stand by just about all the things I said in my slightly too nice review of her. But it's an interesting quandary. But basically, you know, the reader doesn't care whether previously you had a nice encounter with someone. And I can think of any number of reasons why, as a critic, I've probably gotten nicer as I've gotten older. Partly it's a function of age. I think just knowing how hard life is in general and being more inclined to give folks a break than I was when I was an angrier young man. There's a famous saying, and I'll probably get it wrong, but it goes, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. And as you get older, I think you have that in mind a little more, and you are inclined to go a little easier on people's sins sometimes. Part of my being nicer is a function of having gone on a lot of movie sets, being in the studio with people, and just seeing how hard it is to get anything done. I mean, if you go on a movie set, if your reaction is like mine, you think, I can't believe this movie's going to get finished, let alone finished well. And when you see just the difficulties that are involved in bringing any project to fruition, suddenly you may be more inclined to give people a break. But on the other hand, people are going to see a movie, you're paying $9. They don't care that the crew worked hard and has families. They want to know whether it's worth spending $50 or more to get a babysitter for the night, and feel rightly cheated if it doesn't live up to their expectations. And you have a duty to those people. And again, if the project you're reviewing is contributing to the junkier aspects of our culture, you certainly have a duty to point that out, no matter how well-intentioned and hard-working the people who made it were. But at the same time that I get too nice, I also have a tendency to get overly angry and indignant. There are certain things that just really get me in a huff, and I have to calm myself down a little bit before I write. I didn't write about these, but recently it was, I just hated the hours so much that I was just kind of going on and on and on to emails and people about how much I hated it. And the version of The Music Man that was on TV, I felt the same way, and it was probably fortunate that I wasn't writing about those things. But here's one thing I would say to those of you who are interested in doing this for a living or are already doing it, and that's don't be the boy who cried wolf. And there are many ways when you're doing criticism to be the boy who cried wolf, and I certainly fall prey to a lot of them. One of them is to position everything in the most kind of superlative terms. And these are the things you see in the blurbs in movie ads. The best comedy of the year, and it's February. The best action thriller since such and such. Just looking at the ad for Gods and Generals, which is a movie most people, even who were, I think, favorably inclined to it, thought was a little on the dull side. And there were some critics saying, best Civil War movie bar none, even better than Gone with the Wind. And you have these momentary impulses when you like something to kind of take it to the next level and make it better than anything that ever existed. And you hit yourself in the morning for that. At the same time, it's easy for me to do that in terms of calling things the worst, this or that. And it's, that's a cheap and easy way out of reviewing, is just to place everything in kind of bland qualitative terms, the best or worst or the most this or that. And it's kind of the lazy way out for people who don't know how to actually be descriptive and thoughtful. And I certainly place myself in that sometimes. Another way to be the boy who cried wolf is, if you have any kind of moral compass, there's probably a lot going on in pop culture that will bring out the righteous indignation in you, and rightfully so, whether it's, violence or gratuitous sex or the excesses of reality TV or music videos. And I've had to fight that. I can remember, recently I was in Nashville. I was visiting with a guy named Steve Taylor, some of you might remember, and he actually remembered a review I had written from the 80s. When I was at the LA Times, I used to have a music video review column called Sound and Vision. And at that time, there was a lot of, for the first time, I think, rap videos were getting pretty overtly sexual. And I think the one he was remembering was, I read a review of a Sir Mix-a-Lot video called Put 'Em on the Glass, which was about topless car washing girls. And the line he quoted back to me, which I didn't really remember, I think went something like, my closing line was, "The decline of Western civilization continues apace." And he liked that line. And in retrospect, I thought, that there's only so many times you can use a line like that. And so often you'd like to. You really have to hold some of those cards in reserve when you're just, not everything can be the end of the world. And so I think that you wear yourself out as a critic pretty quickly if you get really indignant about things all the time. And you wear out your audience, certainly. They just stop listening to you. My hope, as I was reviewing some of those things, was to try to be more wry than angry. I think that if you can have a subtle sense of humor, as opposed to going for the really digging joke, you have a better chance at convincing the unconverted, as it were. That kind of the more kind of outrageous statements you make, you end up just preaching to the choir and ending up with a very small audience. Finally, just a little bit more writing advice. I think that dynamics are something really important to try to put into your writing. And by dynamics, I guess I'm thinking in musical terms. There's a band I like now called Queens of the Stone Age, and they're a little bit similar to Nine Inch Nails in that, sometimes the music will stop unexpectedly and then start up again. And there are moments that come out of that softness and then loudness that are much more effective than if they were just slamming and hammering at you all the time. And I think as writers, it's important to have similar kind of dynamics. Obviously, you can't stop an article dead, or you try not to, but it's important to try to vary even the sentence structure of your writing in terms of if you're prone to kind of long, convoluted sentences, the way I know I am, think about a spot where you can just stick in a very blunt, simple, to-the-point sentence. And that was one thing Robert Hilburn was good about teaching me back at the LA Times. I mean, he is not someone who's into convoluted writing. He really drilled into me that you need to make things as accessible as possible. Grab people with the lead. If you don't hook people with the first paragraph, then you're in trouble. I think that sometimes the most effective lead-ins to some of the pieces I've written, I think, are where you have an opening paragraph, maybe has 2 or 3 kind of convoluted sentences, and then the second paragraph is 3 words, just to kind of snap people to attention. And at the same time, if you're prone to only providing people with snappy sentences, then again, that can be kind of exhausting to just kind of be jabbing at people all the time and not give them a chance to breathe a little bit. And I think that I've gone on too long, so I will open things up for questions if anyone has any.